Okay, hi, I'm Karen back with Kelly for more question and answers here on grief. So this is a good one, Kelly. I know you well enough a little bit to know how you're going to be answering this, but I think this is very important for other people to hear this. Maybe one of the more important things, because there are so many myths out there about the grieving process. But here's the specific question. Will this pain, sadness, forgetfulness, lack of energy, etc., ever end? It seems as we go through the stages of grief, a new wonder bubbles up.
Yes.
So,
So this could be definitely I'll get on my soapbox about.
okay.
But I'm going to kind of break it down because first I want to address the stages and then we'll talk about, we've already kind of talked about in a previous video about that timeline piece, but I'll address it again. So first of all, the stages of grief, right? Something that most people know about. Taylor Swift just put her new music into a playlist based on the five stages, and I wanted to cringe. But I was not happy with her. But the reality is we don't understand, most people don't understand the five stages, right? They think that that's kind of the gold standard of grief and that's what everybody goes through. And then they come into my office and they're like, well, I'm not in that anger stage, so is there something wrong with me?
Yeah.
So what I have to do a lot of psychoeducation about grief initially because we have been taught outdated things in schools, even but in the world, right? Somebody like Taylor Swift bringing back the five stages, unfortunately. And so some background: in 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with the five stages. And this was after observing people who were actively dying. She found that these people went through these common stages. And then society said, okay, let's use this for grief now. And it kind of became like the no, right? It's what's taught in high school health classes. It's taught to medical doctors, and, it's even taught in therapy school.
Yeah.
And it's just not accurate. And the five stages just is not a good model for grief. It's outdated, it's misapplied, it's actually never been proven. There's no empirical or scientific proof that the five stages exists. Because as you know, Karen, and you and I know, our clients don't go through this neat, orderly
No.
thing.
No.
It is a hot mess. It's all over the place. And so everybody's grief looks so different. So we can't use the word stages because it's not accurate. We're not going to go from here to here and, oh, I'm at acceptance and I'm great now. It doesn't work like that. And it's not linear. And although the proponents of the stages that talk about it say, well, it's not supposed to be linear or whatever, it's just not accurate.
Yeah.
It actually can make people think that they're doing their grief wrong and can be hurtful and harmful.
Yeah.
And I'm really disappointed that it's still taught in schools. I did some education with some local health teachers last summer when they were rewriting their curriculum. And I was so glad to be able to get that out of their curriculum
Yeah. That's awesome.
because that really is one of my big goals. And so, one of the models that I like is more of what's the dual process model, which shows loss oriented and restoration oriented in this back and forth as we go back. And both of them are stressors, right? Both of them are hard. Even when we're in that restoration oriented and we're attending to new things and we're maybe even distracted from our grief, doesn't mean that's easy.
Right.
So a widow who has to, and I keep thinking about this because I have several clients, it's springtime here. So mowing the lawn for the first time and having to do this new thing that they've never done before because their husband of 50 years always did it. But now they're out having to get an electric mower to be able to do this. That's still a stressor.
Oh,
They're
absolutely.
tending to these new things, but it is still a stressor. But, the dual process shows that we oscillate between loss oriented and restoration oriented and back and forth. And that happens throughout the entire day, multiple times. And I think it's just a better model to show that grief isn't this neat, orderly thing. And so that's why I'm not a big fan of the five stages. And so when I saw that question, I was like, oh, I want to answer that one because that's one of my things. If I could really make an impact on the world, is to be able to get people to stop talking about the stages.
Yeah. Yeah. I
and
mean, and
and
it's, yeah, go ahead.
And Terry Daniel did a great article about the stubborn persistence of the stage theory. And so, as if you're a therapist or a grief coach and you're interested in more information, I would encourage you to check out her article because she nails it and says everything that I'd want to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like we can see the appeal because people are looking for guidelines and they're looking for something that is like a roadmap, something predictable, like, okay, stages, like almost like a child development sort of thing. Like we want to be able to know what to expect at different points. But as you said, it can really cause people to feel like they are doing it wrong. The one thing I like about the dual process that you mentioned is I think it also helps explain when people feel like they're in denial. And we could do a whole talk about this, and actually, I think we should probably. But how often people say to me, like, "Yeah," I'm like, "Yeah, how was your week? How have things been?" Okay, I don't know. I feel like I've been in a little bit of denial. And it's like, well, tell me about it. Well, they were doing those restoration activities, like, well, I was very busy at work this week, or I was, doing things, I got a new house, or whatever it may be. And it's like, well, that's you participating in your life and needing to do that at points separate from your grief, even though, of course, it's there. Yep. But it can't be all grief all the time. So, people really worry about being in denial. And like I said, maybe that needs to be its own thing. Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing too is that what I hear from people a lot, not as much about some of the other stages, but the acceptance. Like sometimes when people are reaching out for help, they'll call me and they'll say, well, this is what's happened, and I just need some help getting to a place where I can accept this. Like that is the finish line. That's where I need to get to based on what they understand that this is supposed to look like. So that's where I remind people, one, there is no finish line. There is really no end, which always sounds very discouraging, but it's, the bottom line, as long as you're here, as long as you are loving your person and they're not here and you're missing them, that's grief. That's the grief you're going to experience. I think we'd like to think we'd like run through, like a marathon in the tape and we're like, we're here, I made it, I did it, But so I kind of say to people, I'm like, let's not talk about acceptance. Like, let's, acceptance, one, has a very positive connotation to it, like being accepted in college or being accepted into a group. And I don't think people like that idea. Like, I don't want to accept it, So I'm like, well, let's ease off of that. And the A words I like are adapt and adjust. And I think what's great about those is that we can do that by default. I don't even have to try. And I'm adapting and I'm adjusting because that's how people are. And, when we talk about the healing nature of time, I think that's what time is doing. Not all on its own. We still have plenty of work to do, but that kind of everyday repetition of this new information and becoming more accustomed to it, I think, is what helps us get to a better place. So I'm like, let's make those our goals. Let's adapt as our goal. Let's adjust as our goal, but yeah. So I know that's a big one for you. So
yeah. And that acceptance piece, it isn't there. That's an ongoing, William Worden and his tasks of grief, that first task is to accept the reality of the loss. And there isn't a finish line for that. That's ongoing. That's 10 years down the road when you become a grandparent and your husband isn't there. You're having to accept this new role without him, or it's going to that wedding where somebody should be there and it hits you again when you walk in that room. And so it isn't there. I really like adapt and much better, because that's really what it is. It's, how do we adjust to these changes? How do we, grow bigger than our grief? Our grief is always there. And so back to that second part of that question, will this pain, sadness, forgetfulness, lack of energy ever end? It changes, right? Evolves, right? I think the forgetfulness, the lack of energy, I do think it gets better.
I do.
With time. Also, the more that you do to lean into your grief, to process your grief, to be taking care of yourself, right? Making sure that you're being physical, whether it's walking, whether, it's eating properly, getting the sleep you need, doing these things to take care of yourself. Those things do help. It does get easier.
Yeah.
That sadness and that pain, is it going to change and evolve? Probably, but will it be there? Yes. I love the picture of the mason jars that says, we think that grief, gets smaller over time or something like that. But in reality, we grow bigger than our grief, right? And that grief ball is always still the same size. Our jar just gets bigger. We have, so it can hit that grief, but we can be bigger than it. And I had somebody recently say to me, she's like, so what am I doing here? Like, am I really better? And I'm like, you're growing bigger than your grief. You're now, maybe in that second mason jar. And so that grief is in that focus all the time, but
Right.
it's still there. It can still hit you in the middle of the night, or when that Facebook memory pops up that loves to do that, or your phone memory. It's still going to be there, and it can change, but and it says that when a new wonder bubble pops up. Yeah, because we don't know what's going to hit us, right? We talk, and I think we should do a video on just secondary losses, because that's a huge
Definitely.
thing.
Yeah.
And all of these things that we don't know when it's going to hit us.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
think we're in a good place. When I wrote my first chapter for holistic mental health, I was like, oh, I talk about my mom's death all the time. This will be easy. I even brought out some essays I had written in college about it. I was like, I'll use some of this. I was out at the picnic table outside of my office, and I was a hot mess.
Yeah.
I was crying, and I was like, I'm remembering things that I hadn't remembered. And I'm like, what is going on here? But it was that new thing that popped up, and it hit me in a different way. And it's not a bad thing. But we just have to be mindful of it and be compassionate with ourselves when these things do happen, that it's okay. You maybe drove past that restaurant and it hits you, or you drove past a cemetery, or you go to somebody else's funeral, right? And it hits you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it really does, that idea, what you said, it's staying the same size. Because I find a lot of times people will say, like, they're progressing through their grief, and then something happens and they're like it's happening all over again.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they started back at the beginning. And I always try to remind them, like, you can't start over. You've come too far, time has passed, you've learned too much. So this isn't starting over. This is just like a different trigger or another part of it. But I think, when we talk about getting better, because a lot of people ask about getting better, I always say, well, like, let's define what getting better actually means, because I think people think getting better means not crying anymore or not being sad. And so I really want people to know, this is a big thing for me, is that you can be crying every day and still be getting better,
Yes.
because of sometimes, like with the symptoms and things like that. Like, let's say that I was always an avid reader and then I stopped reading, or I hadn't been taking my walks every day, or I hadn't been seeing friends. If I start to return to some of my more regular routine and parts of myself that I recognize, one woman said to me one time, like, I'm participating in my life again,
Mm.
but you're feeling sad along with that, I still count that very much
I,
as
I
getting
agree.
better. Yeah.
I agree. I definitely agree. You're
Yeah.
still, there's a great children's book that I love to read, even to adults. It's called The Grief Rock. And it just talks about sometimes that rock is really big and it's crushing you, and other times it's manageable and you can still have fun and you can do things. But really, that rock is just made up of all the love that you have and will forever have for you.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's true. In the end, that grief is something that, even if someone tries to come and take it away from you, like, hey, you don't need this anymore, I find we want to hold on to it tighter. This is my connection, to my person. So remembering that sometimes too, it's about making space for it. But maybe we talk about that more another time. So, all right, Kelly. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your input on that for sure.
Thank you.